this little check mark next to walls. By clicking off the check mark, we've turned off all the walls inside of the view. If we select on Apply, we'll then see our walls go away. Now it looks like we still have a wall up here, but the reality is we actually have two separate floors. One floor goes out a little bit farther than the other floor, so we're looking at two floors, not another wall out there. If we wanted to turn the walls back on, we could just put a check mark next to walls, click Apply, and then we can see the walls get turned back on. If I wanted to turn the doors off, I could do that as well. I could scroll up here, find my doors, click the little check mark next to doors. We can see two doors here. If I click on Apply, those doors go away. They're still in the model. We've just turned the visibility of them off inside of this view. But those doors would still show up in all the other views that have a check mark next to doors. If I wanted to turn them back on again, I could just click the little check mark next to the door, click on Apply, and bring those doors back. Now, if I scroll back down to the walls again, we can see that we have two different options here. One is called Projection Surface, and the other is called Cut. Projection Surface would be for elevation views. Cut is for floor plan views or section views. Right now, I'm inside of a floor plan view. Any change that I'll make will be to cut. We can see that we have options here for lines or patterns. If I decide to make a change to the patterns associated with walls, this is what would occur. I can just move my cursor down until I select the white box associated with walls underneath patterns, and click Override. Here we can see that we can either turn any sort of interior wall pattern either on or off. We could add color to our walls, and we could even specify a different kind of pattern to our walls. Now, when we say pattern, where it has no override, if we click, we could pick any of these patterns for our walls, and then it would apply those patterns to the inside of our walls. For example, if I selected on solid fill, and then for color, where it has no override, if I decide to change that to be red and OK, it means that now my walls would have a red solid fill pattern on the inside of them. Click on OK to that, and click on Apply. Notice how all my walls now have a red solid fill pattern. And that's just inside of this view. Now, if I wanted to remove that, I could by just coming over here to Patterns, selecting on the red, change this from being solid fill to no override. Change the color to be no override. Click on OK, then Apply. And then that override that we did to the walls went away. The same thing applies to lines. If I chose a dashed line, all my walls would be dashed instead of having solid lines. Also, we have this annotation categories, which I mentioned a moment ago, and this is all of your text. So this would be some lines, your dimensions, your text, column grids, the way your sections and view tags show up. All that can be controlled underneath your annotation categories. So your visibility graphics are used on a view-by-view basis. They allow you to adjust the way things display inside of a certain view, while your object styles are across everything. So if we would change the overall line weight instead of a 1 to maybe a 6 or a 7 for our walls, all of our walls would get much darker. If we would reduce that down to a 1 or a 2 again, they start to display much like we currently see them on the screen in every view across Revit. Object styles are every view, and visibility graphics overrides are just the view that you're in. Revit allows us to temporarily change the way that our view settings are displayed. And we can do that down at the bottom of our view by selecting on this icon, which is Temporary View Properties. Click on Enable Temporary View Properties. We'll then get a color showing all the way around the perimeter of our screen. Any changes that we make to this view will just be temporary, at least as far as the display of objects is concerned. To see that, if I come over here to the visibility graphics and then select on the edit button, I can then change the visibility of the way things display inside of this view. But because we're inside of the temporary mode, it means any change that we make will only occur temporarily. So for instance, if we cleared the checkbox next to walls under visibility graphics and clicked on OK, all of our walls would go away. But if we wanted to bring those walls back, we would not necessarily have to go into the visibility graphics to bring them back. What we could do instead is come right back down here again to our temporary view properties. Restore the view properties. It'll automatically bring us back to the way that the view was before. So we have our temporary view properties, and when that's enabled, we can make changes to the way that different objects are displayed inside of the view. When done, we can come back down to the temporary view properties again, restore those view properties, and we'll go back to the way that view originally looked. Revit allows us to hide individual objects. Now, if we tried to hide objects using visibility graphics, it would hide all the objects of that type. If we tried to hide the doors in visibility graphics, it would hide all the doors. So to hide individual objects, we have one of two different ways that we can do it. We can either hide them temporarily or we can hide them permanently. If we want to hide them temporarily, we could select on the door, come down here to the little eyeglasses, which is called temporary hide isolate, then select on hide element. Now those will be temporarily hidden. We tend to use the temporary hide isolate just to hide things so that we can see past them. It makes drafting a little bit easier. It makes modeling a little bit easier, particularly when you have tight spaces and you're having a hard time seeing because of so much detail in an area. You may temporarily hide an object just to get it out of the way long enough that you can do your drawing and then turn it back on. Go back down to the temporary hide isolate, reset temporary hide isolate, and it'll bring it right back. Now, if we wanted to hide both of these doors, select on one of the doors, Control key, select on the other door. Once again, go back to the temporary hide isolate, and then we could hide those elements. But if we wanted them to be permanently hidden, we could select on temporary hide isolate and then click on apply hide isolate to view. And that will permanently hide those inside of the view. But there's also a faster way to permanently hide an object. And I'd like to do that with this wall as well as this door. Select on the door, select on the wall by holding down the Control key to select on multiple objects. By right-clicking, we'll get the option to hide in view, hide our elements in view, and it'll hide those elements automatically inside of the view. To bring them back, move our cursor down here to the little light bulb tool, which is Reveal Hidden Elements. We'll start to see each of those elements that were hidden inside of this view. At that point, we can select on each of the elements by just holding down the Control key on the keyboard and then clicking on each of the elements we want to bring back, and then we can select on Unhide Element. Then we can either select back on the little light bulb or click on this big button here, which is Toggle Reveal Hidden Elements mode. It'll automatically bring these things back. So we have many different ways that we can hide elements inside of Revit. One way is through the visibility graphics, but that'll hide the entire category of objects. We could use our temporary hide isolate to just temporarily shut things off, but they'll still print. Or on a more permanent basis, shut things off by selecting on them, right-clicking, go to hide in view, and then selecting element. That will hide them quickly and permanently shut them off in the view unless you use Reveal Hidden Elements to turn them back on. Each Revit view has its own visual style, which controls the way that view displays. Come down to your Visual Style button. And if you select on Wireframe, we'll be able to see right through our building model. Wireframe has a wide variety of uses. One use is that you can select objects through other wireframed objects. If we had any other visual style, I would not be able to select on the staircase or the doorway because the roof object itself would be getting in the way. Also, by having wireframe on, we can see the relationship between different objects underneath an otherwise solid object. An example of that would be as if we looked at this in a plane view. If we were this high up in the model and we were in any other visual style, such as hidden line, we would not be able to see the walls underneath our roof. By being inside of the wireframe view, we can see each of our walls directly underneath the roof. So if we need to select on there or start to pick points around where those walls are at, wireframe mode allows us to do that. Now I'm going to click on this corner of the view cube in order to spin the model back around. Something you may have noticed there is that this model moved quickly. Wireframe is the high performance view. It's fast to move around in, you can see physical relationships better, and you can select objects directly through other objects in wireframe view. If we once again select on that Visual Styles button, Hidden Line is our most used view inside of Revit. It makes everything solid. Anything behind it would be hidden from view. Click back on the Visual Styles button again. The next option is called Shaded, which adds color and shading to our walls. Notice how we now have color everywhere, and we even have shading along each of our walls. We can really see that shade because the surface of this wall and this wall is darker than this wall and this wall. And that's the reason why it's called shaded. If we don't want to see the shade, click back on that button again and select on Consistent Colors. It's the same as shaded, except it gets rid of all the shading in the model. Select on Visual Style again, click on Realistic. You may want to think twice about doing either Realistic or Ray Trace. I very rarely use either one of them. If we select on Realistic, it'll then try to apply materials directly to the model. Realistic doesn't give you perfectly realistic images. The final visual style, Ray Trace, will do renderings on the fly inside of your view. If you let it sit there for long enough, it'll become more and more like a photograph. If you want to get out of this Ray Trace view, come up here to Stop. From there, you can either save the image or you can close. It'll automatically put you back into the previous visual style that you were in. In this case, it happened to be the realistic visual style. We have a wide variety of visual styles that we can use to get different kinds of results. Wireframe allows you to select objects, and it's also the high performance view. Hidden Line is the most used view for your construction documents. Shaded and Consistent Colors allows you to see the basics of your colors and materials. Realistic will give you a better looking, more realistic kind of view. Ray tracing allows you to render your view on the fly while you're moving around inside of your view. Revit has a tool called the Line Work tool, which allows us to manipulate the way that individual lines in a Revit model display. Let's start by selecting on this middle roof. Underneath the Modify tab, when we select on Line Work over on the right-hand side, if we click on By Category, we'll get a pull-down list of all the different line styles that we have available inside of our Revit project. You can see that we have a choice of hidden lines, center lines, medium lines, thin lines, and even wide lines. Choose wide lines. Let's start to pick on some of these individual lines here that make up our roof. Click in here. They'll start to change these to the wide line style. If for some reason your lines are not getting darker, you may need to come up here to the View tab and make sure Thin Lines is turned off. If it's highlighted, then all of your lines will still look like they're the same line weight. By turning off your thin lines, you'll then be able to see the different line weights inside of your model. Come back up here to the Modify Line Work. Instead of using wide lines, choose hidden lines. And then I'll use that for each one of these lines that make up the top of this roof. Notice how just those lines that make up the top of the roof have now been affected by it. Not only has it made it a hidden line, it's also made it a green color. The color has actually been associated with the hidden line style. And we can find our line styles if we come up here to the Manage tab, Additional Settings, then select on Line Styles. If we expand out lines, toward the bottom of the list, we have hidden lines. It's a green line weight, and it's a dashed line pattern. Click on OK to that. That's exactly what we have here. So we're applying those line styles to any of the individual lines here in the Revit model. Come up here to the Modify Line Work tab, and then select Invisible Lines. Select on any of the lines. Those lines will become invisible, even if it happens to be on the outside edge of something like a roof. And if you apply these line styles, this kind of line work inside of a view, even if you would spin that view around, it'll maintain those kinds of line styles that we've applied with the Line Work tool. We can see that all those different line weights, those line styles that we applied, are still maintained inside the model, even though the view has changed considerably. Underneath the project browser, what I'd like to do is go to our West elevation view. Scroll down to Elevations, Building Elevation, and then go to your West elevation view. All these lines appear to be fairly lightweight. If I wanted to make the lines darker around the perimeter, select on one of the walls, come up here to line work, choose wide lines available at the bottom of the list, and then start to pick each of those lines and go around the perimeter of our view. We can now punch out the outside lines and make it look like this wall is actually closer to us than the walls in the background. So our line work tool can be very helpful to us in the art of design communication.